this week, I'll be discussing Indian philosophy with you and various schools of Indian philosophy. And those of you who've been listening to this podcast for a long time would remember that probably around a year ago, I discussed certain schools of thought, but I imagine it's not a bad idea to keep visiting these good ideas from time to time. And this is what I'm going to do, starting with the Charvak school of philosophy or the materialist school of philosophy, and which is what I'm going to discuss today. So this school of philosophy, it's called Charvak school, and it's quite old. It's really, really old. In fact, some of the ideas are found in terms of scriptures. They are found even before the times of Buddha, or many of the Hindu texts were written. And once again, I would like to remind you that in Indian religions, Indian philosophical systems, a lot of times there has been a culture of questioning the idea of God. For example, certain religions like Jainism or Buddhism, as such, there is no idea of God. And therefore, this whole thought process of a world without God, or in modern parlance, the materialistic idea of the world, that's not really uncommon in Indian philosophical schools. And one school which takes this idea to complete extreme of materialism is that of Charvak school. Now, the challenge that you face while studying Charvak school is, as such, we don't have direct texts attributed to Charvak philosophers. What you find is some kind of secondary references from other schools, and a lot of times in these references, what you find is these philosophers are criticizing the idea of Charvaks. So one might argue that these people are misrepresenting the Charvak views, and that could be the case. But then that is all we have, and therefore we have to tread very, very carefully when we read the Charvak views, which is what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to discredit Charvaks. I'm going to give them the benefits of doubt, and a lot of you might just think that I'm giving them too much a benefit of doubt, but I think we have to be fair. So let's start with their basic assumptions. What is their idea, the metaphysical underpinnings of Charvak school? To understand that, we have to start with, what does a Charvak consider the valid source of knowledge? And in a Charvak's case, there is only one valid source of knowledge, that is your own perception. So to make this whole idea a little simpler, when we seek truth in our day-to-day lives, we rely on a number of sources. For example, a scientist makes a discovery. In that case, we are relying on the testimony of the scientist as well as the evidence that we have been provided with. But in Charvak's case, you have to understand that Charvak does not consider these as valid sources of knowledge. To him, what he sees, what he observes by himself, that is the truth. Other than that, if he hasn't seen the moon, he hasn't been on the moon, he won't believe in it. And that is the kind of philosophy I'm sure some of you would have seen in this Bollywood movie called Aankhon Dekhi, where the protagonist, he goes into this mode where he just refuses to believe anything that he's not observing by himself. And he says that, this is the only truth. What is in front of me, what I can see, testify, validate, that is the only truth. And that is something the Charvaks believe. And one might wonder, it makes your life really, really complicated, because a lot of things you're not going to experience yourself. A lot of things you're not going to experiment with or learn by first-hand experience. And still, we acquire knowledge through different sources. But a Charvak does not do that. And here, once again, as I said, I'm going to give them the benefit of doubt, especially when some people critique them that this view is really materialistic and really superficial. I think it's quite interesting, it's quite deep and spiritual in some ways, that you experience yourself. You don't go by somebody else's testimony. For example, in religion's case, what we do is we go by somebody else's testimony and we believe that. In fact, in many scientific matters, we go by other people's observations. But if you think about it, if you think about the subjective experiences that we have in our lives, if you just consider them, the quality of life, the subjective quality of life, it purely depends upon how you perceive them, how you experience them. And if we just take those things into account, your life might become actually very simple. You don't go by other people's opinions. If you look at a color and it makes you happy, if you look at the sky, for example, and you feel happy, that's good enough. You don't have to go by the opinions of thousands of people who might disagree and say that you have to have certain celebrations in order to be happy. You just go by your own perceptions. Of course, then the criticism might arise that your own perceptions, sometimes they might fool you. As we've seen in the case of virtual reality, how we work on the perceptions, how we kind of manipulate them. And what we are doing there is tricking a person into believing something which is not really the reality. And the same thing happens in your dreams. You think you are somewhere, you are experiencing it, because that is what your perceptions are telling you right away. But that is not really the reality. But I think to Charvaks, this does not really matter. To them, if they are in a dream and experiencing that, that's fine. They would say, as long as we experience this, as long as this is the truth in front of us, that's fine. And we don't really have to have an objective view of the world. We might not have an objective reality at all. There might be infinite subjective realities, who knows? So from a Charvak's perspective, the idea is just about your own subjective view of life and how that goes. And now there's also an interesting point about Charvak's philosophy. It's that, so when we are discussing this philosophy, for example, I am speaking something, or in some cases I'll be writing something, and then you'll be decoding those words or sounds and then interpreting them according to your own understanding. And that is not really a valid source of knowledge to a Charvak. So somebody who follows this Charvak philosophy, if he believes in it, if he is trying to teach this philosophy through words, through expressions, he's actually going against the very idea of this philosophy. And that's the irony here. And I think that's the main catch here. That is the problem. We don't find a lot of Charvak texts, because when you pursue this philosophy, you're not going to teach anything apart from just observe. Just use your perceptions and live your life. You don't have to learn anything, you don't have to follow anything. There are no teachings, there are no lessons to believe here. It's just that you are being aware and you're living life as it is. And that's also the life many modern materialists live. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, metaphysically speaking, this view is very close to the modern scientific view of reality. So when it comes to consciousness, this is a very, very difficult question, of course, but to the extent that we have an understanding of it in terms of based on scientific evidence, the understanding that we have, a lot of scientists believe that consciousness as such is not really some kind of soul that is residing inside a body, but it's a byproduct of the material body that we have, and it has evolved over many generations, millions of years, and then eventually human beings developed this consciousness. So this idea of me being an observer, me being me, my consciousness, to many scientists, this idea is a kind of illusion which is a byproduct of our evolution. So matter came first, it is our primary reality, and then that matter's byproduct is the consciousness. But on the other hand, when you consider the religious view in most of the religions, it's the opposite. The consciousness or God or whatever you call it, that comes first, and then comes the material reality. First came the God, then his creation, or first came the consciousness. First there is this consciousness, universal, and then out of that evolved the matter, and matter evolved into a lot of things, including you and I. So in religious philosophies, first comes the consciousness, out of that emerges the matter. But in terms of materialistic philosophy or the modern scientific philosophy, matter came first, it evolved, and eventually we got as a byproduct the consciousness. And this view is pretty much aligned with the modern scientific view, and that's why it's got a lot of appeal to those people who are of the scientific temperament, who are very, very rational, and they don't have any problem with this view. Some people also argue that with this kind of view, you might have really, really selfish, hedonistic tendencies. Because if you're just considering the materialistic world, all you're going to do is chase materialist pleasures of your senses, and then you're going to fall into that trap. You'll never find the real meaning in life, you'll never find the depth in it. I think there is some truth in that, but there is also a problem. If somebody who's not really contemplating the idea of an afterlife, and he's really looking forward to a good life here on earth, even then they can aspire to have a meaningful life, even spiritual life. And in a lot of spiritual traditions in the eastern part of the world, you'll find this kind of attitude. For example, in Buddhism, you don't really care too much about the afterlife, but you work on certain meditations, you work on certain practices that you improve your life, you improve the quality of your life here on earth. So it's not necessary that if you have that view that you're not really caring about afterlife, you are going to have a meaningless life and you're going to have those life crises of all sorts. Those may or may not happen. But of course, I'm not saying there are no problems with this view. There are, of course, very, very practical problems. How are you going to study? How are you going to work around your way in this world if you're not going to learn from others, and if you're not going to consider other sources of knowledge? At some point, this looks like an idealist view of living your life. You observing everything, you taking it moment by moment, day by day. And some people might practice it, and some people might enjoy it. But I think the challenge is majority of people are not going to accept this view in their lives. They might accept it to the extent that they seek materialist pleasures, but beyond that, just relying on your own perceptions to validate any kind of truth, I don't think that's ever going to happen. At least that hasn't happened so far. But at least philosophically speaking, theoretically speaking, and you should even try it practically sometime, just go by your perceptions for a day. Don't consider anybody else's words. If you have any kind of question, for example, should you tell the truth? Or should you hurt somebody, or should you be kind to other person? Consider making your own choices based on your own perceptions and your own mind. Whatever other people's opinions are, keep them aside and navigate in your own way. And some of you would find this exercise really, really heavy, so don't try in that case. But if you find it interesting, if you find it worth a try, you should do it.